Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author, bringing you a series of interviews with some amazing sculptors who inspire me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs accompanying the interview, the episode show notes, and get a free novel from sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello, Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me today. It's been an exciting week for sculpture. I hope you all saw the magnificent unveiling of the Betty Campbell statue in Cardiff by none other than Eve Shepherd, who was on the show last episode. I really think this was such a tremendously important moment, a great figure to be commemorated, someone from the local community who did really great work. And I can't imagine how hard that must have been for Eve. So hard to put your work out there every single time. I know that that's what you do, you're sculptors, but my goodness, with so many people looking on, it really must take a huge amount of bravery to face that kind of scrutiny. So well done, Eve. I'm so proud of you. I think everyone who listens along to this show would be too. So today I'm going to be talking about plinths and dangly bits, which is definitely an unofficial title, but two different aspects of a project that we recently completed for Haringey Council. And though each aspect is pretty different, they're both valuable things for sculptors to think about and know a little bit about if their sculptures are going into public spaces. This is just about putting yourself in the client's position, and what we're going to discuss aims to prevent you handing your client a whole barrel of conservation problems which are of your making. They won't thank you for doing that, and we all know that keeping a client is much easier than finding a new one, and so you want your clients to always think of you in a positive way, not as that rat that saddled them with an ongoing headache and a constant leak in their wallets. The Oliver Tambo statue is in Bounds Green in North London, and this project really excited me because it happens to be in my local park, and I spend oodles of time there between my kids and the dog. So I was happy to be involved in putting this poor statue right. The restoration work was part of a civic project at the park, which was about renaming and rededicating the space. The statue was installed in quite a boring recreational space. It just used to be called the Wreck, and it gives the space an identity. The park now has a focus around this local hero, and that's why commemorative sculpture is just so vital, I think. It may not be quite as out there and maybe as exciting sometimes as other types of sculpture, but celebrating good people is something we can all get behind. We've all got that in common. No matter your opinion about style of sculpture, no one can argue that some people's deeds should be remembered and celebrated. So if you don't know Oliver Tambo, he's well worth reading about. He lived locally to Muswell Hill when he was exiled from South Africa, and he was the president of the African National Congress and was close friends with Nelson Mandela. He was a figurehead in Europe for the African National Congress and vital in publicising the plight of black South Africans and canvassing international support for the fight against the white minority apartheid government. Unusually, the statue is the work of a team of artists and technicians, which were all under the leadership of Dali Tambo, who's Oliver Tambo's son. And there's another one of these sculptures in the airport in South Africa, but it's huge. It's so vast, towering above everyone, that it doesn't have any of the issues that I'm going to be talking about here. And in conservation, that's actually one of the first things you do. As soon as you look at sculpture, we look to other sculptures from that artist or of that type in other locations to see how they are faring and how the problems they have might have been solved. But it's no good looking to this one because unfortunately it gives us no answers. So this sculpture has a really striking stance, one where his arm is held aloft and in his hand is a very fine scroll, which is the Freedom Charter, which was made of sheet metal and has been spot welded into place in his hand. In his other hand is a beautiful little set of rosary beads with a very distinctive cross at the base, and he stands on a very small plinth, less than a foot high. And it was this eensy-weensy, tiny, unassuming plinth which got me started thinking about what I wanted to talk to you in this episode about. Now, plinths are falling out of fashion, and the problems that occur with low-level bronzes are quite significant. And it was this and a conversation with one of the artists that's coming on the show later in this season, Christine Charlesworth, who got me thinking about talking to you about this today. Christine is a cracking sculptor. If you haven't come across her yet, do look her up. But she was saying how much she disliked plinths, and I don't think she's the only one. My observation is that more and more contemporary bronzes are being put on a level with their public, and it's perfectly plain to see why. It's wonderful if you're someone like me, a sculpture vulture, who loves to commune with magnificent bronzes, especially of our heroes, the idea that they are on our own level, literally mingling with us, is a really tantalising thought. But for all you creators out there, you probably don't realise that in so doing, by not putting your statues on a plinth, you are handing your custodian such a number of headaches which are so easily avoided, and a lot of conservation cost which is associated with those problems. So I'm here to tell you a little bit more about what happens to low-level bronze and what issues are likely to arise. I'm going to talk in general terms in this part of the episode, and a little bit later I'm going to speak more specifically about Oliver Tambo and his issues. So when a sculpture is down low in a public place, it's what I would always term high risk, and that's because there are just so many things that can happen to low-level bronze. People lean on them, and that might not sound so very terrible, but leaning, say with your bag on your shoulder, which has a buckle, will almost certainly result in scratching a surface. And even if you're only leaning, people do it continuously, which imagine it's not just going to happen once, people do it all the time, particularly when they're waiting for their friends and they're trying to look cool, or maybe some gorgeous date they've got. It's abrading away the surface. It's actually stroking away the surface when that happens continuously. Now, also you've got to remember that when people hang out and wait for things, they maybe put their leg up behind them to balance. That foot will probably have dirty soles, grit on their surfaces of their soles, which again, abrasion, dirt, it will scratch, it will damage that patina, especially when it happens continuously. Then you get that man or lady, in my case, walking their dog on a lead. They're maybe looking into the distance. They're not noticing that their dog has cocked its leg on that fantastic memorial. You would obviously pull it away if you did, or I would hope. But that fierce acid going through that on that surface is going to rip through that protective coating, and when that happens dozens of times a day, you're going to get lots of really nasty green streaks building up, corrosion that is happening directly to the surface of the sculpture, and multiply that many times and you've got a pretty messy low level leg. Then maybe the sculpture's on grass and you have mowing happening around it, grass sticking to the base of the sculpture, organic matter sticking and rotting, breaks down the protective coating much faster than it should, which inevitably means that your bronze is exposed to the elements more quickly. Also with grass, you have automatic watering systems very often, or even you have people watering the grass who aren't really thinking about what they're doing and they're putting the water everywhere. And gardeners tend to think, well, What does that matter? I mean, the statue's outdoors anyway. It's getting rained on morning, noon and night. But of course it does matter, because water coming up from your hose, from your tap, it has a lot more limescale in it than rain. And goodness, limescale is a nightmare. You will know this if you are there scrubbing your bathrooms every week, because it sticks like hell. It doesn't corrode the bronze in the same way that something like urine from a dog would, but it actually claws its way into the surface of a bronze. And you know, with your bathrooms, you will use acid via cal, people use, and or you will really scrub it hard. And this is both things we can't do to a bronze's patina if you don't, well, you can do it, but you will damage it severely. So having limescale build up is a massive problem. If it's not on grass, you're going to have your statue maybe located directly on paving. Some people put maybe their statue on a bench as if it's sitting next to people. Now, on a paved area, you inevitably get power washing. They have to make sure that the paths are clean. Obviously, people dropping disgusting stuff all over the paving, or chewing gum is another one. And dirty water splashing up and hitting your statue with grit, which just happens always to be on paving. You're going to get damage that way, because that dirty water will sit on the bronze. It will, anything that's dirty will react more rapidly with the surface, and unfortunately you'll get an accelerated corrosion happening in those locations, especially if you're getting a frequent wet-dry cycle. In winter on paved areas, you get salting for de-icing. You have to. I mean, people will slip over if you don't. But those corrosive salts do end up reacting with the bronze. They get moved around. They get maybe washed away, blasted away after the ice has melted. And unfortunately, as soon as you hit it with something like a power washer, those salts get moved up onto the surface of the bronze, and it results in disfiguring damage. I mean, chloride salts, which you get with de-icing salts, they can cause something called active corrosion, which is an absolute nightmare. Humans, they're gross, they're disgusting. People spit, they drop coffee and Coke, they eat ice cream on statues which drips all over the place. Oh my gosh, I've got one statue which gets covered weekly in yogurt. I don't know why. I can't tell you. But every week we turn up, it has yogurt on it. And they do more unmentionable things at night. Don't ask me why. Low-level bronze at night seems to be some kind of beacon for anyone who's had too much to drink and needs to relieve themselves. And so all these things accelerate the damage to the surface, and often that damage is not just in a kind of generalized way or localized area. Marks of dripping and dropping things on cause really ugly marks, disfiguring marks, and obviously that's something we don't want on our sculptures if we can possibly avoid it. And then there's the arbitrary, stupid damage, I'm going to call it. This is the stupid category, like carving a name into the surface. And I'm not saying that a plinth is not going to stop someone jumping up and carving something into a statue if they want to, but it is a bar to entry. It's more awkward to climb up something, and just that bit more effort, in fact. And so the chances are, if you're going to carve your name into something, you might do it on the wooden bench next to the statue. And in a related it's the same category of stupidity, climbing up statues just because it's fun. You know, taking a selfie of yourself with the statue on it, you know, draping yourself over the shoulders. If it's low down, it's just so much easier to do something daft like that. And statues may look strong, but they just aren't designed for people pulling themselves up on things, clambering on them. And more often than not, breaks occur, welds fail, parts snap off. Now, placing a statue on a reasonably sized plinth would prevent many of these issues happening. Just by lifting it out of the way of people, it makes the statue that much safer. And in terms of rate of change, which is something a conservator assesses a lot, you are moving it from a high risk zone to a medium risk zone. And I'm not saying that plinths can prevent all of these problems. A determined mind will make most things happen. And my middle son, for example, would definitely be able to climb most plinths. I mean, obviously, he knows, having lived in a family which is like mine, who spends their whole time talking about bronzes, that he would never be allowed to climb a plinth. But physically, he could do that. And it's just about ensuring that there is a distinct boundary in place. Most people know that they shouldn't climb a plinth, and so they don't. I did actually mention that Oliver Tambo is on a plinth, and it's just that it's a very little one. So if putting a statue on a plinth is such a good idea, why am I there restoring Oliver Tambo? Well, in his case, his plinth actually made the whole situation worse. It's so small that it actually encourages people to stand on the plinth and makes it much easier to climb, because it's actually like giving people a step up. And unfortunately, it gives them a step up to the most vulnerable parts of the statue. And I have watched 1 trillion children, at least, swing off the arm of Oliver Tambo and climb that sculpture. And actually, he's one of those cases where if you'd actually just put him on the pavement, you would have been doing him a favour rather than giving him this miniature elevation. And if you're thinking, well, all of these things should just be dealt with by a maintenance plan, the thing is that dealing with this quantity of damage is way outside the category of maintenance. It's all the way over in an entirely different ball court of restoration. A routine maintenance is not capable of dealing with this extent of damage. Routine maintenance is about removing dirt and grime, a bit of guano, detritus, and it's about consolidating the protective coating, making it robust on top of the original layer. Setting a statue on a plinth means that a statue shouldn't only need periodic maintenance treatment, but down in the dirt, down on the pavement with the rest of us, to keep it looking half as good, you'd need to maintain it at a much higher frequency, and you would have to restore it. Because once corrosion takes place, or once someone's carved their name into it or physically damaged it, no amount of cleaning, no amount of maintenance is ever going to reverse that. And if you're thinking, tell us more, I'm going to be doing an episode on maintenance frequencies and all about maintenance in the upcoming season. But suffice to say, street level bronze on average needs about 12 times the number of visits compared to a statue that is put on a plinth. And on average, you're going to need to build in at least a restoration visit 2 to 4 times a year. In excess with something on a plinth, you don't usually budget for restoration visits annually. And what you need to understand is that once a statue begins to start looking bad, it's that, I think they call it the broken window scenario, it snowballs. Once someone starts abusing a statue, once it starts looking rubbish, it just more and more damage happens. It's like people think, well, someone else hasn't been in trouble for graffitiing it, and they add to it, and the result is you get a lot of antisocial behaviour happening around sculptures. Sculptures gather people. I mean, that's why public sculpture is so wonderful. I mean, people flock to it, but you don't want people flocking to it and causing more problems to that sculpture. You want people interacting with it in a positive way. And I'm not making this up. Our company won a civic award for helping to improve the behaviour in an area where a local statue had been the nucleus of poor behaviour, antisocial behaviour, and changing the condition of the statue materially changed the behaviour that people were carrying out. Just a little plug now for my non-fiction book, Bronze Behaving Badly, which takes you through all of these issues, but much slower and in more depth, I hope, than I'm discussing here. And it's aimed at teaching people about the issues that can affect bronze and how to plan to prevent those issues. You can buy it online at all the big retailers, and also you can buy it in paperback format or Kindle if you prefer, or wherever good books are sold. So you can go into any bookshop and order it. It should be available to you. And please do that. It's a great support for the podcast. It helps me to keep this running. Now let's talk more specifically about the Oliver Tambo statue. The rosary beads that he was holding in his hands and the Freedom Charter were the two things that are continuously getting damaged on this poor sculpture. The beads that are clasped in his hand, they are so easy to get at, and they are a really important accessory. It wouldn't be the same statue if you just said, right, well, they keep getting stolen, we're going to remove them. The Freedom Charter equally, which is held up for the world to see, with that little plinth, it is in super easy reach of people. And these two accessories, they tell Oliver Tambo's story. They represent his strong faith and the political work that he has dedicated his life to. Both these features were designed in such a way that they are a constant headache for the custodians because they are so easily to pull off. The rosary's cross is not cast into the body of the sculpture. It's a separate entity entirely. And unfortunately, it's just the perfect little souvenir dangling there for people to take. It's just fragile and unfortunately too easy for people to steal. If it had been cast maybe into the hand of the sculpture directly, those beads could still have surrounded the hand. The cross could still have been made incredibly evident, but it wouldn't have been able to be pulled off. And as regards the scroll, if it had been cast into the hand, it would have been impossible nearly to pull out. Instead, it's just brazed into place. And I don't actually think that with the case of the scroll, it's vandalism that dislodged it, because actually the scroll didn't get stolen. It was just found next to him. But it was really, I think it's a case of too much adoration, too much love. I mean, I've mentioned that I've watched trillions of children swinging off the arm. The problem is that when they grabbed hold of the scroll, it's wrenched out of his hand. Those welds, they're just not up to bearing the weight of people. You know, if it was small children swinging, that's one thing, but you get a teenager swing. I mean, my son, a teenager, he is some weight. He's definitely heavier than I am. And so something like that would have made those welds go instantly. And so the thing is that casting that scroll into that hand would have ensured that, I mean, an incredibly strong weight would have been able to be put on that without it giving and ever falling off. Next time, that scroll, they might not be so lucky. Someone might just decide to take that scroll home, and then you've got to get it remade, even more expense. Now, in South Africa, what they did is they just made him huge, and they could have made this sculpture larger, not by scaling him up into a terrifying figure, but by putting him on that elevated plinth. And if you're creating for public spaces, I think the idea, and you definitely don't want to put your sculpture on a plinth, I think the message here is make sure that vulnerable pieces, particularly the extremities, are made as one, as part of the whole sculpture, not as separate detail. Because remaking and replacing and repairing, it's totally doable, but unfortunately it's really expensive, and when something has that fundamental design fault, there's really very little a conservator can do to solve that problem for the client. I mean, we can only work with the existing design. We can't chop off his arm and recast it and make it in a better design. It would be highly unethical to do that, but it isn't the sculpture that was originally made, and that is what a conservator is there to protect. Please let me tell you that this isn't just happening with, say, Oliver Tambo. I can give you dozens of statues where exactly the same thing has happened. One of them, Philip Jackson, who you will know from his fantastic interview last season, brilliant sculptor that he is, has the most bonny sculpture in Mayfair of the little Mozart. It's a picture of a sculpture, but obviously the young Mozart wouldn't be complete without holding a bow in his hand, and it's just continuously broken off. It completely defeats the custodian because of the fact that every time it gets replaced, within minutes it's bent. People try to climb him, and unfortunately the bow is in the perfect place for people to grab hold of and pull themselves up onto the sculpture, and so if it's not bent, it's broken. Now, I know what people are thinking here. They're thinking, well, just add more fixings, surely. And with the Oliver Tambo statue, we did do that to some extent, but the problem is the more fixings you put into a sculpture's accessory, the more that you're creating a situation where when someone swings off the scroll, for example, the weight causes the scroll itself to snap. You always want to make a join the thing that will give rather than the feature itself. If you'd been casting the scroll into the hand, it would be part of a much larger entity of bronze, and so it wouldn't be the weak point. But in the case of a sheet metal scroll, if you welded it and pinned it and made it so strong in that hand, you would make that sheet metal part be the vulnerable point on the sculpture, and so inevitably it would be the thing to snap. So please don't think I'm saying never have special details added to your sculpture, little extra parts. I'm not saying that. Oliver Tambo's cross and scroll tell his story, but thinking about how the public will use or abuse your statue in that space means that you can ensure those details are solid for your custodians, as solid as they can be, and you can make them much happier clients. And as we all know from a business perspective, a happy client is your best form of advertising. Word of mouth is what we all want in business. You want them to say, this sculptor is amazing, and you want them to be inspired by your work. Coming up in the next episode is Claire Abbott, who has been shortlisted for the Emily Williamson campaign. She is a Northamptonshire sculptress and has carried out commissions for Wickstead Park, St Mary Magdalene Church and All Saints Church in Northamptonshire, among many others. She's a very engaging entry in the Emily Williamson campaign, so do take a look at her maquette and look at the others and do vote for the campaign. If you're looking for a new book, please consider one of my novels about the dark side of the art world, where sculpture is always at the heart of the story. You can get them on the show website, on the usual online retailers, or even better, keep your local library alive, ask for them in there. Thank you for joining me today. Sculpture Vulture has been brought to you by Antique Bronze.